Hi, I'm Amanda Bickerstaff. I am the CEO and founder of AI for Education. This is part of our AI Launchpad series focused on bringing like AI to schools and educators. And so today we're really focused on school leadership and implementing AI at the school level. Whether you're a school leader or a teacher, it really doesn't matter, because what we're really going to focus on is more of the structural kind of components of thinking about implementation. I have with me two amazing people. I have Moses Ojeda, who is the current principal at Thomas A. Edison Career and Technical High School in Queens. And I have Matt Cole, who is calls himself a recovering superintendent, not to take his thunder, but he does a lot of work, not only having been a CEO and founder of work he does right now with consulting with schools. He's a former superintendent. And if you know anything about IEI, he's the founder of that as well. So really excited to have you both here. We'll have some time to introduce. If you've been here with us before, you know that we like, even though we can't see you physically, we do love to have an opportunity to interact together. So those of you that have put into the chat where you're from, what you do, please do that. You all are early adopters, you're focused on this. And what's great is, like, I've seen such good conversations in the chat. Share those resources, share those ideas. Like, we really appreciate that, but so do the network that you have that are with us tonight. Also, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So just keep your questions for that. Well, I'll be looking at the chat, but we'll really be focusing on that Q&A at the end of the session. And we'll do a bit of prompt engineering. We always try to do a bit of prompt engineering live. And so Moses has volunteered to create a new prompt for our library. So there'll be that opportunity to prompt along with us. And then finally, you know, we hope you have a good time. And, like, you know, if you have a great resource or you have, you know, something that you'd like to share, please do so. So this is part of our AI Launchpad series. It's hard to believe we're almost through the summer. Luckily, New York has a bit more time, but I know that schools are starting to think about going back in the South. And so really excited to continue to have these webinars. We'll be doing one next week with Bridging the Digital Divide with AI with Dr. Philippa Hardman from the UK. We've got our curriculum that we're launching. Like, all of our curriculum will be launched on the next one, introducing AI to students. But we have all kinds of great webinars and really hope that you continue to learn with us. And yeah, so I'm actually gonna come off share so you can see everybody, and we're gonna get started. So welcome, Moses and Matt. I'm gonna start with the question we love to ask, which is, can you please introduce yourself, but also tell me about the first prompt you remember doing, or the first use case of ChatGPT that really was your light bulb moment.
So hello, everyone. My name is, as you heard, Moses Ojeda, and you know, longtime educator. I actually lead the school I went to as a student. So that's a pretty unique experience for me to be doing that. And the first time I used ChatGPT, I think it was back in January, I really felt like I had to dive in because I was seeing in the media so much. And so I was like, I need to know what this is about, because they're saying it's going to affect education. And so I started to dwell with it. And then my daughter actually asked me to assist her with an essay she was writing. And she was having a hard time getting the concept of the thematic essay and some of the prompt keywords that she needed. And so I said, give me a minute. I need to go research that, because I'm an IT guy by trade. So, you know, I was able to help her out, and she was very happy. So that kind of was the aha moment to myself to say, hey, wait a minute, we can use this for kids to have like their own personal tutor, right? We can use this to help assist them for those who need the extra support. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And I love, like, you know, dad time, right? Not principal time, but dad time was the first moment of crystallization for you. And then over to Matt. What was your light bulb moment, and what do you do?
So yes, I call myself a recovering superintendent, not to demean the profession, but once you're able to step away, you can get a little sense of all the good work that you do. But I served as a superintendent for a decade, and in education for a couple decades. So I taught before the turn of the century, and have seen a lot of technologies come. Certainly, I've been behind the curve my entire career, I think, as far as my age and development and the new technology that unrolled, whether it be the internet or the app generation or any of those kind of things. I was always leaning into it, but a little bit outside of the curve, trying to catch up. So I think with ChatGPT, I'm trying to be the same thing. How do I catch up to what's moving? The first time I used it, I was actually doing a consulting project. I was working with a district, and thinking back to the way I used to do the same similar work, I would have had a large conference table. I would have had books, that I'd read over my career and had resourced over on my bookshelves. I would have had this page open here and that page open there. Today's world, I would have used Google to then supplement some of those things I liked in books, right? And I would have put this whole project together, and it probably would have taken me on and off 3 weeks. And instead, I said, well, let's give this thing a roll, and created some prompts, and within 30 minutes, got a first draft project piece that I was able to deliver to the school and use it as our first conversation, and it was really of good quality. And so, I mean, I think it's just an amazing tool, and where things are heading is going to really be very interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? To be able to get us to a place of synthesis or a place of first draft that can take so much effort and time so that you're able to like focus on the conversation. I'm sure if you wouldn't spend 10 hours building this, you were able to actually like engage better in that moment and like actually learn from it together. And I think that that's really where we see a lot of the value immediately, is that I was keep talking about the blank page being the hardest thing, like having a blank page. But if you have something that gets you closer to that conversation, that deep, rich discussion, whether it's with students, with your colleagues, with consultants in schools, or Moses with your teachers, I think that that's really where we see a lot of value immediately. So I'm going to ask our first question. And so when we think about generative AI, starts coming out to the market in November, we have some people that are talking about it. January, it starts to hit where it becomes something available, in ChatGPT 3.5 is really a step forward. Students might be using it, teachers might be using it, or might be afraid of it. And so what do you think the impact has been of AI so far? And if you don't believe that, that's okay too. But what do you think it's so far, Moses?
So no, it's interesting because I have a lot of colleagues that I collaborate with. And so I think every school is unique, and also each borough is different when you think about New York City. So some are more advanced than others. I can tell you that at our school, it's mixed. I have a few teachers who are working on how to see how they can use it. I have others who stay away from it. And something I was discussing earlier is some people feel like maybe they shouldn't use it because it's a bad thing if they use it. And so I think there's mixed feelings is where I'm going to go with this. And so for me, I think that it's in order to make sure that we embrace this technology and use it properly, like everything else that's out there, it can be used for good or bad. I'm very proactive. I'm making sure to say, hey, let's put this in front, and how do we use this for the betterment of what we want to do for our students. And so I've pushed that on some teachers already. And so I had an English teacher, no surprise, who had heard all these things on social media about, how it was going to change education. I mean, I had some teachers telling me they thought it was going to replace their job. And I was like, no, there's certain things you still need to have the human aspect, right? And so I said to this teacher, have you tried it? No, I just heard about it, but I think it's bad. I said, okay, so you can't really judge something unless you dive into it. And so I said, look, you're very innovative when it comes to lessons. How about we work on something together? How about we think about how we can create a lesson using ChatGPT, but for a positive, And so she said, you know what? Let me think about that. And I'd like to come up with it on my own. And she did an amazing, and if it's okay for me to share, she did a mashup lesson. And so she goes, I want to take up the mash concept of when you remix things and bring word problems to be created by my students using the current text we're reading with the same characters based on the situation they're in. And so she's now so excited. She wants to do more with it. And what was great about it is she then invited a fellow math teacher to come in and say, let's look at what the output gave us. And that math teacher was able to find certain things that were missing, some key words that could have really changed the output of that word problem. And so we discussed how you have to double check your work. You see how ChatGPT is not always accurate. So it was a great lesson. And, she's now part of our committee. And again, I think it's key for people that are going to be embracing this technology, and you should, that you create a committee that's going to see how they're going to roll this out with a policy. I think that's a key aspect here. So I'll stop there.
No, it's good. And I love that moment. I talk about the light bulb moment that you all had, but I think that there's so little understanding. This is not like better Google, or it's actually worse Google. It's not very good at like doing what Google does. And so you have to really show it, not tell. And I think that the fear associated with it is real in some cases, but it's also just the unknown in a way that, and there's so much rhetoric around us all the time talking about replacement, cheating, all these big buzzwords. But it is interesting how not only does she say, I want to do it on my own, but then she also went to the math teacher on her own, and then they collaborated, and that to me is so great, because it's what we want to happen in schools, right? We want that ownership, that agency, and that collaboration to happen, not just our students, but our teachers to feel that way as well. So I'm going to take it over to you, Matt. Same question. So what do you think the impact has been so far of generative AI?
Yeah, I think there's at least 3 general groups working, right? There's the ignore group, there's the ban group, and there's the embrace group. And how large those are is probably contextual, but also, right, I don't know. I mean, the embrace group's probably on the small side, right? And the ignore group's probably on the large side, I would say. And that's what I found, at least in my journey, my travels, and working with schools, and just talking about, like, are you talking about AI? What do you think about this? Certainly hit the media, right? And New York City certainly was they had a little ban moment there, right? As they went through some of it. So that caught some media attention. But I think writ large across public education, I think we're more in the, I don't know. And I'm not thinking about it right now, which you're doing great work of trying to get us to think about it, and to think about it in rich and meaningful ways. But being someone who taught at the turn of the century and seen technologies move through, I think it's going to take some time. I think it has the potential to really transform things, to really grab. I know what I loved when I was pre-service and learning about Bloom and about constructivism and about learning and about all sorts of wonderful things, and then trying to implement those through my own brain, and only my own brain, was challenging and difficult. And that's why different initiatives through my career of differentiation and other technology integration and lots of really good pedagogy, I don't think they took as much hold as they could, because it was really, really hard. What I see with these large language models and how they're built, right? I think they can really be our extra teacher assistant, and they can really become our research assistants, and do these things that can help differentiate lessons, and can help do things like instantly, within a few, like within one setting in that lesson planning period that you have, you can do far more than I ever could. But part of your question, some of the things we've talked before, like, has it impacted schools? I don't know if we're there yet. I mean, I think we're so much on the front end. I think schools, as a general institution, move so slowly. And yes, there's innovative best practice pockets across the nation, led by great leaders and great teachers. And I think we'll continue to have that, and hopefully they'll proliferate and there'll be more. But as an entire system, I agree, Moses, we need some policies. I just don't see my colleagues leaning into that, partially because I don't know if they have the level of understanding to command a conversation about it, and the unknown and uncertainty as far as boards of education go, and as far as the institution called schools, especially in a politicized world that we live in right now, is not something that a superintendent necessarily is going to say, hey, let's go explore right now, because the world is a pretty challenging place, and coming off of COVID, and coming off of a lot of other politics that have entered into schools and school boards, sustainability and stability are two pretty important thought processes that I think a lot of school leaders have right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack. I mean, I think what really resonates with me, what you said, is that, we've had a ton of technology, and some of it was pretty good, maybe. but we didn't necessarily embrace it, or there weren't the systems in place to embrace. As a former ed tech CEO, let me tell you, everyone here, it is very hard to sell to schools. Even if you have something that has value, is evidence-based, it doesn't really make a difference in the sense of what you're selling. It's just very hard to sell because it's, we have a very fragmented approach, and not every, if you're in Australia, it could be every state, it could be the different territories and bodies, and in the US, this could be school to school, district to district, and a district could be one school or, 10 schools. And so I think that there's that, when you talk about the ignore phase, it's earned. It's not cynical. It's earned. I remember when I taught, and there are certain things that come in, you're like, I'm barely alive. I'm barely alive. I'm teaching in the Bronx. I'm 22 years old. I'm the only science teacher. I'm writing 4-page narrative, lessons because I'm so afraid of doing something wrong. I'm getting my master's at night, and I'm spending, 20 hours extra a week just grading and lesson planning. That this new thing came in, and it wasn't even that I didn't want to do it, it's that I couldn't do it. And so I think that that's a really strong component as well of that, we see teacher burnout and the amount of time in our webinar last week. On average, people spent 4 hours a week only on lesson planning. And so that didn't mean all the other stuff, and we know there's a ton of other stuff. And I think that that's a big component of it as well. But then the last thing I'll kind of call out to what you said is that there is, I think, some reticence to adopt new things because of the politicization, but also just the unknown. You don't want to be the person that adopts ChatGPT like New York City without any regulations in place. And in fact, ChatGPT isn't fit for purpose for schools right now. It's got bias. It's got what we call hallucinations, where it does things wrong. It messes up. It's not reliable. And so it still has great use cases in other situations, but it actually could cause harm. And so I think that there's something to be said about what you all are talking about, and what we're going to focus on next is when you think about this, for your next year. So Moses, you're, gearing up. I know you want a little bit more break, but you're gearing up after summer school year's going to start. Matt's is out in schools every day, I think, for the next, as long as he has any runway. What are you actually thinking in terms of when you talk to schools and you think about your own school? Do you think about embracing it? Or are you thinking about regulating it, banning it? Where do you fall on that spectrum? And what's the advice you have to those that are watching today?
So for me, it's about embracing, right? Because when you embrace, you're able to look at the pros and the cons, right? If you put it to the side, it's still going to be used. It's still going to creep its way in. And so why not have conversations on how we should use it? And I think that's key, right? Because like anything, for someone, and I'm just going to use an analogy because someone had used it before. If you go try to play golf on your own without getting someone to guide you, you're going to pick up bad habits, right? And I was told, and I don't golf, folks, but I was told when you pick up those bad habits and then you get a coach, it's harder to break the bad habits, right? And I think we can look at anything like that. You pick those things up. So for me, it's about putting it out there and having discussions. So for us at Addison, I had quite a few teachers already come up to me to sign up to be part of this policy panel. And what's key for me is to have voices from all departments. So I like to have self-selected individuals on be part of it, or they want to volunteer. And I think students are a big part of this as well, right? So hearing from them, and at Edison, we do promote student voice and we have them at the table. And so for me, I think that we're going to have those discussions early on before the school year starts, to discuss how we're going to move forward, because we're seeing it already. So again, I don't want to be someone that ignores it or that hopes that it goes away. I don't see this going away, right? And so again, it's about embracing it, but bringing people to the table to say, how can we adopt? And again, I'm gonna say that there are percentages of that highlight who's using it, who's not using it. And I really think that's skewed. Because again, I think some people are using it, but they're afraid to admit that they're using it, right? And so, because they're in between, right? So for me, definitely embracing it, but in a controlled way that we can use it. And I really think it'll change education for the better. And most importantly, save time. I think that the one thing we've realized after this pandemic is that we've taken on more work now than ever, that's different, right? And so how do we gain that time? So, time is the most valuable thing out there, but you can't buy it. And I think that ChatGPT is going to help us get it back, at least some of it.
Oh, well, here. I think that we see by far the best use case to start is helping teachers and leaders save time on the tasks that are not focused on the classroom, that are not focused on like communication, like actually driving learning and engagement. And so I think that this is something that we really see. And I want to highlight a couple of points. One is student voice. Dan, I'm going to ask Dan and my team and ask you to put in the channel our student panel that we did a couple weeks ago. And the reason why I want to do that is that these 15 to 18-year-olds were saying, yes, we want this, but also regulate it. So they were more balanced, I think, than like any teacher or leader I've talked to. And so I think that this is really, really important because we have to think about the human layer of AI, but also students are going to experience this in a lot of way. And they're dealing with, we talk about replacement. This could potentially replace jobs. It already is. This is going to have an enormous impact on students' lives when they get out of school in ways in which no one else is going to have that experience. Okay. So like there is a real importance to bringing them into the conversation. And then I love the fact that you're thinking already about what you're going to do before the start of the school year. And this is something that I really suggest. I was at the NASP conference a couple weeks ago in Denver, and I said, you don't have to do anything, but please just put in place something in your academic integrity policy that is there so that you have some kind of support, because we're going into the unknown. And if you don't have that, the whole semester could just be you against student, like teacher against student, teacher against teacher, potentially, because some people are embracing it and some aren't. And so I think that your idea of that cross-functional early kind of focus on policy is a really great one that I hope everyone here can take on board if appropriate. So Matt, from the other perspective of recovering superintendent, which I hope is on a card, and then to the actually being able to be that consultant that is bringing in that extra, mind and an opportunity to really think through these things. What do you think we should do? Should it be embrace? Should it be regulate? Should it be ban? Where is it?
I don't know if I can join any of those just yet. I think we need to process it. Like, this is such a big change. And so, I mean, I guess it's leaning towards embrace because it's going to happen. Like, the fact of the matter, I think learning is going to move learning will move more quickly forward. Learning from the students, learning from the individual practitioners. Like, people are using it now, and they're going to use it before. We didn't really see that as much like when the internet hit, because not everybody had access. But now everybody, most people, certainly through the pandemic, where a lot of schools went one-to-one as a big lift to survive, right? So now it's out there, right? And so it's going to be used, and it's going to shake everything. Like, from how we assess, how the pedagogy, like, it's going to hit everything. And the conversations I'm having with some of my colleagues is, hey, you need to think about that, because it's going to happen. If you don't, it's going to be October when maybe this big paper's due, and someone's going to turn it in, and a kid is, students aren't always the best at keeping secrets. So a student's going to say, hey, yeah, I did that thing in like 3 minutes because I used this thing, right? And then that's going to roll through the school, right? And then you're going to have a teacher on your doorstep, Moses, right? As a principal, this, you're going to have a teacher, you're going to have the parent, and you're going to have the kid, and they're all going to have a conflict around whether or not a child achieved a 0 or not because they used an outside resource like ChatGPT or any of the others. So are we going to start chasing that too, right? So you're sitting in a policy conversation, you're just going to say ChatGPT because that's the one that's most, right? But AI is out there, right? So it's like, how much are you going to chase, right? Different technology solutions, because certainly students will do that to say, no, you said only I couldn't use ChatGPT, but I use blah, 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 right? So, I mean, I think we have to decide, are we going to wrestle alligators, or are we going to tame snakes, right? So I think you go about it by saying, like, how do I create the environment to tame this, right? And to make it part of our conversation, part of what we're doing, make people aware of it, have as many advanced conversations as you can. because if not, right, there's just going to be some ugly situations that just pop up and grab people, surprise people, even though maybe they shouldn't, because right, it's been out there. But again, I don't think people have all thought through this, but I do think it can shake the system in a way to get better outcomes. And at least from my perspective, like move ahead on pedagogy and move ahead on assessment practices and move ahead things that I've been working with people for my entire career to say, why is it that we do that? With one last point, that won't change though, because I can also hear another argument in states like New York and other places, but because of No Child Left Behind and then ESSA, like these state accountability systems, if you just think of like what they did with calculators, right? For a long time, there was no calculator allowed, right? And so the argument's going to be internally that we're going to have is going to be well-intentioned, caring, loving, dedicated, educated professionals saying, well, I'm preparing them for this assessment. And on this assessment, they can have none of those resources. So how can they have all these resources here and then not do that, right? So that's going to be a really, because those systems in particular, so Moses can move his building forward quicker because he's got a good organization and he's a good leader, right? So individual buildings might be able to nudge forward, but those state accountability and those accountability systems, they do not move in any kind of rapid pace, and that will be that'll create some challenging conversations for sure. Even after we get through like what is it and how do you use it and how can we improve? So there's a lot of work ahead.
Yeah, and I want to like highlight this idea of like a lot of work ahead. I think that the thing about it though is that work is important work that we should have been doing before LLMs. Like, so we say LLMs, we mean ChatGPT, we mean Bard or Bing or Claude. So these are these large language models that allow you to ask a supercomputer, like what you need with natural language as if you're having conversation. You no longer need to be a coder. You no longer need to have computational thinking. You no longer need to make sure that everything is perfect in syntax. You can misspell things. But what's really interesting, and I think, is that when we talk about the 5-paragraph essay or high stakes testing, these are conversations. I was a teacher 20 years ago, to date myself. Those are conversations we were having then. And I think that this is what is exciting about that. There is a lot of work ahead, but it's going to become such a present part of our lives because it's in Snapchat right now. It's going to be in Google, in Microsoft, and it's going to be in Facebook. It's going to be in Instagram. That it's going to have this forcing mechanism to have those conversations about rethinking what schools are and rethinking assessment and what are we actually like, what is the school for, like, and what is learning and what are the skills of the future. And I think that while that's a lot of work, the cool part is that the 74 people here and us and others are already starting to think about this, but there's an opportunity to actually make schools better for kids with better outcomes and more equitable outcomes. There, of course, is like the opportunity that we all go, we all go like, turtle, to use another, we talked about snakes and like alligators, but like there's the turtle or the putting our hand under the sand. But I think that we're going to see such a forcing mechanism of everything around it, that this is going to take education with it because it has to, because it's going to be impossible to ban and to regulate at the level in which it needs to. So I think it's going to be very interesting. And now, I think that this is a really great conversation about what could happen. But if we're thinking about practical strategies, like what are the practical strategies that you have that you think about? And Moses and I have done a lot of, like Moses is, a really early adopter in New York City. He's someone that people, if you want to talk about the light bulb moment, he's actually the person giving some principals a light bulb moment by showing him a prompt we're going to look at. But when you think about this, and we're still going to kind of focus on the work of being a leader or a school. We'll go into a Q&A where we can talk about more use cases. But let's situate it within, you're a school leader, you're working with teachers and supporting students and families. So what are your strategies?
So for me, I always think about, I'm very an optimistic type of guy, right? I look at the positive. So when Matt is saying, There's these assessments kids got to get through, and the teachers are going to bring that to the forefront. Then I'm going to challenge them and say, well, how can we use ChatGPT to get these kids to create their own study cards, right? How can we leverage it so that you can get past that, but let's teach it in a fun way. Let's teach it in a way that that makes it more relevant. And again, the reason I'm so big on student voice is because they're the people we service, and they tell us, if you bring them to the table, how they learn best. And so if you're not able to produce what they're requesting, then ChatGPT is for you, right? So at Edison, I think the thing for me the most when I talk to leaders, how can we leverage this technology to, yes, do I use it for observations? Yes, we're going to show that. Today, I was with a group of leaders that I'm coaching on career connected learning. And so the discussion was, how do we bring that into the classroom so that we can support the pathway that they're creating? And so many of them, like, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that. I said, guys, how about we use ChatGPT and see what it puts out? And two of them are like, what is that? I've heard of it, but I'm not. I was like, okay, you need to go on there. It's free. Let's make this happen. And it started to give us some information on how to embed the career connected learning experiences that the students would need in the academics, right? And so again, we've been hearing this whole week through that program from students, industry, and people who were just hired into the field. And the main question is, what did high schools do for you, and where can high schools improve? And maybe what are some things you would tell a principal? And they want more of those skills that traditionally are not taught in the classroom. And I think that ChatGPT can be leveraged to help teach those skills. And so that's the kind of movement we're on at Edison, and also going more towards a performance-based assessment, because we're also realizing that some of the skill sets these kids will need, you're not getting in the classroom. You need to try to create that environment. And what are the skill sets I'm talking about? Soft skills, right? And so what's interesting, I spoke to a cybersecurity gentleman who's in the industry. We spoke to a data analyst individual who's in industry, and they both said to us, we're really not holding on the skills so much, because we'll teach those skills and technology constantly changes. But are the individuals we're hiring, do they come with enthusiasm? Are they eager to learn? Do they like to explore? Do they bring critical thinking skills? And for me, it was like, wow, we really need to change up the classroom, because we're so used to just giving information. And so that's where we're trying to leverage it. And I think that'll help the teachers get, to that level. And that's where we are.
Yeah. I mean, critical thinking, the 4 C's, right? 21st century learning has always been like, oh, it sounds so good, right? They're all started with C and like, they all make sense. But like, how we actually done that, and I think that when you look at Burning Glass, which is they really focus on skills of the future, workplace, and do a lot of work on that. About 7 years ago, they put out a paper that said that the jobs of the future there's going to be certain things you need to have, like that you have openness to, or certain types of background, but the vast majority of the hiring will be based on soft skills of, the ability to communicate, to collaborate, to be able to work with different types of stakeholders. Like, those things are going to become more and more important. And I think that that's really where it gets exciting, because if we're taking some of this work off the shoulders of teachers, like, I know that when I was having a bad day, because a lot of stuff was going on, I was a worse teacher. And it wasn't because I didn't care the same amount, but I was in a reactive space. And so is there a better opportunity to teach those things and model them, even if we have less stress that goes along with this? Moses has a question from Jen about sharing the prompts that you use. So we definitely will share that, Jen, just in terms of that career connectedness. And we're going to show a live prompt in a moment as well around a use case that Moses uses all the time. And is magic for his fellow leaders. But I'm going to go to Matt. So like, if you have those practical strategies, like, what do you think, if you could have like 2 or 3 things that everyone here took back to their schools, what would that be?
Yeah, I got to clear one thought that I think is not much of a strategy, but an approach. But to build on what you guys just said, I mean, I do think over time, for public schools to remain and render ourselves relevant, it is to lean in the character side of what we do, because it's not knowledge transmission anymore. So, it has to be like, and it's actually what I think most educators, we talk about teacher burnout, most educators, I know I was an economist by training. as my undergrad. So I didn't go to Wall Street. I went to school so I could coach lacrosse and be with kids. Right. So I chose to be with kids. Like that's what I wanted. Right. And so that's what educators want, that piece, but we've often been feel guilty and focus more on the knowledge transmission and that sort of stuff versus like, hey, just be with kids. They can get knowledge in lots of different ways now. Right. But now how do we really move this next step to become facilitators and collaborators and coaches and right, caring adults that really is why all of us became educators. Right. I mean, that's the passion and the heart is right there. So now we can use this as a pivot point to really unleash that and rekindle those fires, hopefully. Specific strategies, like as an administrative piece, this is awesome. Right. This is a great tool for us to use. If you think of just even like my process, which was read a lot of books, read a lot of articles, right? If I'm going to try to synthesize something to send to my staff on an important topic, right? There's a whole conference table and hours that you just don't have. And so when you're a principal or superintendent, you lose that. You want to do that, food for thought notes or those type of things. Now I can do it, pretty quickly. I can do it, as I'm walking down the hall, maybe, using the Wi-Fi, I can get things ready and be ready. Now I still have to use my judgment. I still have to, I have to still put my leadership spin on it. But, the research-based kind of conversations that are really important to ground, bite-sized chunks, right? Using prompts to say, give it to me in 5 bullets, or give it to me in 2 paragraphs, or give it to me in, right? Like there's just a way that it's an amazing tool. AI is to be able to do those things. I think I saw some in the chat there about strategic plans. There is no shortage of plans that are required in schools. And so if you're a leader trying to do that, either the whole plan or portions of a plan or those type of things, right? You use these prompts to get you to that first draft, so that then you can spend the time talking with and collaborating with students and teachers and community members around, all right, how do we refine this? This is a start, but not the finish. Now, how do we're going to meet 3 times and we're going to refine it to get it to where it's customized and for us. But, plans and strategy stuff is definitely part of where AI can help us.
That's awesome. And I'm actually going to pull up. So we love to do live prompt engineering. And so if you've never been with us before, you have before. One of the things that we love is creating prompts based on what we've done. And so we have a classroom observation prompt that Moses uses in his class, in his own work. And this is kind of an unlocker for him. And so what we do is this is built for educators, and leaders. So we have all kinds of different pieces. For leaders, we have like emails, newsletters, observations. For students, we have study plans, like Moses was saying, like we have, things around planning and those types of pieces. But what we're going to do is we're just going to do an example prompt where we're actually going to get ChatGPT. First we're going to get ChatGPT to write us a lesson plan. So I'm actually going to you were a history teacher, Matt? What did you teach?
Yeah, I taught economics, but I also taught social studies. Yep.
Plan for, we'll do Regents World History.
Sure.
A favorite time period?
French Revolution.
French Revolution. Okay, so if you've never done this before, we have nicer prompts, but we're just going to do this pretty quickly. But this is a free version of ChatGPT. Play with it. It's pretty fascinating. It's really good at these complex prompts. It's got us a lesson plan with objective materials. The lesson plan has an introduction, historical context, some causes of the French Revolution, key events and stages, impact and legacy, closure and reflection. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use this. We're going to say, we have this prompt. We have a lesson. This was actually done in person. So Matt went and did this, and I'm sure he did an amazing job. But we're going to say that we're going to prime ChatGPT to tell it what it is. So first of all, it's an administrator at an urban high school, and you're really good at providing feedback that's actionable to classroom based on classroom observations. We want it to be connected with the Danielson framework because we're in New York City. And we want it to be, what we want you to do is rate the following components just based on the lesson plan. And so we have some other stuff here where you can add classroom notes. What I'm going to say is use the lesson you just provided. So what we're going to do is it's going to evaluate the lesson. So it even gives you a bit of a format. What I say is this is one of those things where the more you give it, the better it is. So this isn't necessarily a format that Moses would use or Matt would use. But what it does is it starts to give you this idea of it's a proficient rating based just on the lesson plan. It's got coherent instruction. It's very good at questioning and discussion techniques. Maybe we'll see about that, but it is something in which it gives you a starting place. And then if I added teacher contents, where this is just based on the lesson plan, but I said, refine this observation report based on the teacher not only doing half of the lesson and not engaging students in the reflection component. So this is something that gives it more detail. And what we're going to see is, there we go. It actually took down the coherent instruction, the using the questioning and discussion techniques, the engaging students in learning, and the using assessment. So that would be what we would expect, right? So it started with a proficient lesson, but we all know this. We're all, if you're a school leader or you're an educator, it's not about the lesson in your hand. It's about the moment in which you teach it and the context and what happens. And so this is a great example of how, and what I would say is we never suggest taking this and copying, pasting it. That's not what Moses does, but he will use this as a starting place. And what you do is it now can go back from that, but it gives him a place in which it now is something in which it's really nicely written, it's targeted, it uses the language of Danielson, which we want to use, and it's something that Moses can do in a significantly faster phase. So this is part of our prompt library, but I wanted to go to like Moses, are there anything else you would do normally?
Yes, so I would love to jump in here, and think you did an amazing job showcasing it. So usually what I'll do is I'll copy and paste the teacher's lesson. I will then so again, what's key with ChatGPT is you have to be very detailed on exactly what you want it to give you back. So I would actually tell it to rate it on the HEDI system, which is highly effective, developing, and ineffective. Then I would actually select the components that I want it to rate. Once I get that rating, I will then put in my low inference notes. And that's what makes it unique, right? So that because if you just copying and paste what it gives you originally with just a lesson plan, anybody can do that, and it's not going to look authentic. And that's something to what Max said, is when he uses it, he has to put himself in there, right? What is it that makes it unique is when you're able to edit it and put yourself in that picture, right? And so the low inference notes makes it so that it does capture what we saw in that classroom, right? But the best thing I love about ChatGPT when I do this, and the reason I do it, is that, again, I'm an IT guy. When I taught computer repair, web design, Microsoft Office, and Cisco networking. Those were the areas that I taught as an instructor. So I was a tech guy. So sometimes as a leader, I need, and I think someone put in the chat, the standards. You can easily just tell it which standards you want it to be aligned to, and it'll do that for you. And it'll actually pick up if the standards were not aligned to the lesson. That's the other thing it'll do for you. And the other thing I see that it does is it's able to tell me, and I'll give you an example. I had a discussion with a teacher, and I said, you were engaging the kids just in the front of the classroom, but everybody in the back was doing their own thing. And you're passionate, you're doing great things, but you need to spread that around the classroom to get everybody involved. So I always like to pose a question, what would you do differently? And that person actually said to me, I'd like to do rotating stations. I said, wow, that's pretty cool. You're going to have the kids get up, you're going to have them moving around, interacting. How would you do that? And he had to take a pause and say, I don't know. I'd have to research it. I'd have to put it together. And in my mind, teachers this year were overworked, right? Everybody was overworked because we're dealing with so many different layers now after the pandemic. And so for me, I said, you know what? Let me do this for him. Let me create that lesson plan for him. And so I was able to take and give an activity on rotating stations on adding and subtracting polynomials. Not my best subject as a high school guy, to be honest. But it gave me, and then it gave it to me where it was like 50 minutes long. So I was like, no, it's got to be 40 minutes because we have 45-minute minute classes. So I wanted to end at 40 so that there's closure time. And so I was able to do that. And then I said, can you take the existing lesson plan and create an activity? And it was able to give me that also. And I packaged that in an email to the individual and said, hey, you mentioned rotating stations. Here you go. Try this out. Call me in. I'd love to see it in action. And don't worry, I won't write you up on it. If it goes well, you tell me if you want me to write you up on it. But this is what I think would help you out. And he actually was able to do it. All right. And thank me for the time I saved them on doing it, and asked me, how'd you do that? And I taught him how I did that. So those are the things that, again, has helped me to save time, especially on observations. But it's not just the time factor. It's the fact that now I've changed the mindset of that teacher and the engagement level, which ultimately affects the students. Right. And I think that's the end game here is, how do we utilize ChatGPT to change the classroom environment so that the students are more engaged, but also, as I said before, relevant with the times, which is something that Matt had mentioned, that's where we're going. That's what has to happen, and industry is asking for that.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, I want to say thank you for everyone from around the world being with us today. We're just at time, and we always try to respect your time. This will be recorded, so if you have to drop, we totally understand. We'd love for you all to connect with us as well. If you are, if you're on LinkedIn, we're very on LinkedIn, especially myself. But please hang out with us and connect. We always answer everything that comes out. If you can stay, we'll just go a little bit longer. We'll have one more question as a wrap up, and then we're going to throw it to you all. So please put your questions in the Q&A if you have them that you'd like Matt, Moses, or I to answer. But please connect with us. Please do the feedback form before you leave. We love feedback. But just thank you all for joining. So my last question to Matt and Moses, and I'll actually start with Matt, is how do you think education is going to change in the next 5 years? What if you have your future goggles, you are now Magic and you are future Matt, what do you think has happened in 5 years in education?
So I think AI will continue to evolve and be refined in a way that will give us the best opportunity ever to have personalized learning happening in our schools. It will be able to empower our educators to move to being facilitators and coaches. It will allow our pedagogy to shift to be more constructivist and to be able to think about learning and not just about transmission of information. And it should be able to blow up the traditional and conventional assessment, archaic systems that unfortunately we all still have in our systems. Will that happen in every school in 5 years? Is my nagging confront the brutal fact question. I don't know how much at scale that happens, and unfortunately that may lend itself to more inequity across our country of schools that are better preparing our kids for the world as it is, versus systems that are preparing kids for the world that used to be. And so, I mean, that's happening now, and it has happened all my career, but it certainly has accelerated the need for change. And I hope that colleagues will be able to move that forward. And I know many will. I don't know if every school will, how differently every school will look. And I use just the pandemic for that, right? Some schools really got innovative and figured things out and were able to try a lot of different things. And as soon as the pandemic happened, other schools, right, I heard that a lot of, I want to go back. And their back wasn't necessarily to 2019. Their back was to the psychological safety that practitioner had, whether that be 2003, 1993, or maybe 1983. It's just a human nature thing. They were going back to the last time they felt in control and confident about the education they were providing kids. and I'm being a little bit hyperbolic by saying 1983, but going back wasn't just 2019. It was a desire to go back even further. So when things push us, if we're not in a safe and supportive environment to be innovative and take risks, that's just human nature of staying safe and holding on and gripping hard to the things that whether they will help us be productive moving forward or not, sometimes it doesn't matter. So there's a big emotional, psychological, human component to this change process that people are going to have to manage through the next 5 years.
Yeah, and I'll pick up two things. One is we did some research. I was a CEO in Australia of an ed tech company, not Australian, but we did some research at the beginning of the first year of lockdown and then the end. And what we found is that there were significant differences based on equity level of the school, but the most kind of bracing difference was at the end of the school year. We talked to 600 principals. And we asked them, how confident were you that students had all of the learning in which they would have had normally? And how well do you think your school was able to respond? And 100% of independent fee-paying schools said 90 to 100% of learning happened, and we were 100% confident that we did this well. That was significantly lower in Catholic, which is also low, like fee to low pay. And then it was significantly lower in government schools and so public schools. And so it was pretty remarkable to see 100% though, say that they did this well. And I think that that is a real question around equity, around access, because at that point, it's not only the school that has a leg up, it's the home that has a leg up. Those students will be getting personalized learning and tutoring the same way that their parents are paying for it now. They're most likely going to have it at home in these kind of supercharged ways. So that's one thing. The second thing, though, is I really, really deeply agree with this idea of personalization of learning is going to be the first really cool thing. Like you can right now, the 15-year-old Krishev who was on our webinar 4 weeks ago, he's built a tutoring app for kids specifically because like one-on-one tutoring is by far the most the evidence-based approach that has the most impact on students' growth and the biggest impact of an AI system of any. Intelligent tutoring is the first bastion that's really had really strong impacts on student progression. So, and I just think that that's really cool. And I have lots of hopes that maybe if the schools can catch up, Matt, the kids will, because they'll have it on their mobile phone and maybe they don't even need to have bandwidth. It's just down there and it remembers them. And it knows that they love Pokemon or Beyonce or whatever they do, or golf. Like Moses doesn't like golf, but I know your son loves Spider-Man. So, I think that those are the things that are going to be really interesting. So hopefully there's that balance that even if schools can't keep up, that kids and families will be able to, especially if we keep things low paying, mobile first, and low bandwidth. So Moses, you're going to take us home. And then I think we have a couple questions.
Sure. First of all, it's not that I don't like golf. I just never got into golf.
Sorry.
So
Sorry to any golf
golfers. I don't want to offend any golfers out there. So for me, similar to Matt, I think that the one thing that the pandemic taught us is that sometimes you're forced to learn new things. And so those people who were ahead of the game had an easier transition, or I wouldn't say transition, but were able to navigate those waters better than others, right? And so thankfully for us at Edison, because we're a technology school, we had things in place already. And so we were able to utilize that to our advantage. And what really helped was when we created a committee that was really comprised of every stakeholder at the school and had students and teachers. So anything we were trying to put out, we ran it by them first so we could get that first, get the perspective from each person, right? So how does this affect you versus a student versus the guidance counselor versus an administrator versus a teacher versus a social studies and math? And so all that was discussed and helped us to get us going. But one thing I recall is that everybody was tech savvy. So when kids and families were having a hard time logging in, anybody could pick up the phone and guide them. Right. And so, yeah, I think that some schools were not able to do that. And I actually heard that some schools were copying packets and having families come pick up the packet and bring it back next week. We'll give you the new packet. And because of that, the fact that we were able to embrace technology early, it gave us a leg up. And I will tell you that Edison increased in enrollment after the pandemic, like 200 students. Right. And so I also think that if people don't get on board now, to change the level of education, the kids are going to suffer in the transition to be hired or go even to college, because I think this ChatGPT can help them and leverage the playing field. I really think it will, for those who don't have the skill sets versus those who do have the skill sets. I think they'll be, if they can find a way to use this resource to lessen the gap of the opportunities some kids don't get versus others, it'll really, and they could put their own twist on it, meaning they personalize it. If they can get that down packed in how they ask for prompts and how they ask for work, it's really going to level the playing field, I think. And so for us in the next 5 years, I think we're going to be forced to change, as Matt said, and we saw that already. And so I'm just fortunate to, again, be ahead of the game. I'm innovative. I'm always thinking about how we can do this together, because I don't do it alone. I have a team, and I think that makes it easier for us. So change is coming. It's how you're going to take on that change.
Absolutely. It kind of reminds me of like winter is coming a bit. Like,
Right.
like, this is not the White Walkers, it's generative AI, and actually general AI, which is really the kind of big thing that will be coming, right? Like that's the 5-year plan, is that there will be a general AI, like, you know, Skynet, but hopefully that doesn't want to kill us all, but not to leave on a negative point. But I think that that is real, though, that this is part of our lives, whether we want it to be or not. And our job collectively, so everyone that came here, Moses, you work in the, you know, the coal face of being with students every day, and teachers and students and community. And then Matt, the network effect that you have of working across schools, and hopefully our work of trying to create spaces and resources in which people can really navigate adoption responsibly. But hopefully there's more and more of that, right? That we keep coming together and we find this path together. And this is why I get so excited. I was talking to, you know, Moses and Matt. I didn't know Moses and Matt 3 months ago. I didn't know them 4 months ago. Like this is, but you know, there's so many great people thinking about this. And if we keep that collaborative approach, then we just have such an opportunity to be able to be in a position in which we can bring schools and students along and work through that equity gap. So I just want to say thank you. First of all, I just want to say thank you, Moses, and thank you, Matt. I am so thrilled to be able to have your perspectives here. And I know everyone appreciated it, but I also want to thank everybody in the you know, session. It's the middle of summer. We appreciate your time. We know you're coming from all over the world. So we just want to say thank you, and I hope that you all have a wonderful night and keep in touch with us. And yeah, just thank you, everybody, and have a great night, morning, evening, wherever you are.